Brookings?
Yes, yep, I'm in Brookings.
Okay, good. Well, we're going to get started because it's that time. We'll wait for the other people to join us and hope that they get in early enough so that we don't have to backtrack too much. So today, we're going to be talking about interpersonal skills. And just to give you a kind of a framework and why I thought this would be an interesting subject and topic is that as I've done economic development stuff over the years, one of the things that came to the surface often from employers was we don't really fire that many people for incompetence. And when it comes to like workplace related things, it's not so many problems with skills. There are problems sometimes with finding skills, but really what we have a problem with is people getting along with each other. That's usually why we fire people, is because for one reason or another, people aren't getting along, you know. And it turns out to be an interpersonal skills things of managers who don't know how to talk to people that they manage, and people who are managed not understanding how to talk to managers. You know, what are their, what kind of insecurities do these people have that make them act in a certain way? And how do I work around that? When is a good time to introduce a new policy, the potential for a new policy or change in policy? When is it a good time to complain about a coworker? How should I complain about the coworker? Should I go to the coworker first in this problem versus another problem? How do I handle all of those things? Those are things that are really come to the bottom of, or get to the basis of like a lot of complaints. A good example, and something that pokes us in the eye all the time, is sexual harassment. Now, you say what you want, but there was a time when hit songs had words from men and women, had words like, "I'm going to knock on your door, rap on your window pane till you come back to me." And those were hit records, and nobody ever raised any voice that was something out of the ordinary, right? Well, now we need to have conversations about, okay, how do you approach people? It's not enough to say, oh, you can't do X, Y, Z, especially when most of their lives are spent working. When you're either working or sleeping, you put those together, there's not a bunch of time. So when are you supposed to meet a significant other? And where do you gain the skills to approach it in a dignified and an acceptable way that nobody's harmed and nobody's threatened? That's not in our DNA to know that. We have to have conversations and practice and things like that. So to me, that's one of the examples of a weak interpersonal skills. We don't know how to approach each other. More recently, a few days ago, I was at a tourism conference, and we had these breakout tables where we worked in groups at tables, and one of the people at my table said, I'm kind of old school, and he said, but I'm more interested in quality tourism than quantity tourism. You said South Dakota, the style of life we have here is a lot because we don't have many people here. It's not crowded, and I want to keep it that way. I don't want a whole bunch of people. I don't want to, and my town doesn't want a whole bunch of tourists coming into town. When the people come for Sturgis, the people who live in Sturgis, they start heading out of town, and they don't want to be there with all of those people. So it occurred to me that, okay, I get the crowdedness, but it seems like there's something else that's going on. Namely, that there are people, I don't know how to deal with these new people, because I see the same thing. Let's say when a new person, people will say, oh, we want new people, we want more people to come to our church. And then when a new person does, a family come to the church, you watch everybody look like, why did they come here? Where did they come from? Like the people got off a spaceship or something. So they don't, and it's not because they don't want people, they don't know how. They don't know how to start a conversation because they don't have any practice, because for years, everybody that they know, they always have known. They grew up with them, or grandpa introduced them to Uncle so-and-so or the neighbor down the street, and now you play with that kid, and you've played with that kid since kindergarten, and you haven't played with very many new kids, and you don't have an experience dealing with people that you don't know, or especially that people don't introduce you to, So that says to me that there is some lack of interpersonal skills. So I thought, oh, let me put that out there, and let's talk about that a little bit. And so first of all, I would like to get your kind of reaction / pushback or whatever on my assessment of the lack of interpersonal skills in our illustrious state.
I was jotting down things as you brought that topic up, and I think it's such an important topic in all of our lives and whatever we do, workplace, in our beliefs, where we go, how we're accepted in towns, just like you said. That is a big topic, and it's very, very important. How do we help others to understand? How do we bring new people into your community? You want them to be like you and people you're living with? Or is your goal to understand them? So maybe a way would be to start listening to them, and don't be being combative when you ask questions, but ask them as a serious wanting to understand them and appreciate their ways of doing things or any of that. And then you may even ask, well, how do you feel that we're doing it? Getting that communication flowing in a loving, accepting way. I had just heard yesterday that there is an organization, I don't know the name of it, that is starting an instruction with doctors to learn how to handle the interpersonal relationship with their patients. And that's not taught in med school, but they're using ways to start that. Great topic, Lawrence. And, there's different ways you can think of doing it, but you definitely have to recognize that this is a problem, and maybe ask them, how can it be solved? Get ideas from others. We learn from others. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because those are very important points. And along those lines, you were saying like it wasn't taught in medical school. There could be an argument that it shouldn't be taught in medical school. It should be taught in kindergarten. It's like when they get to medical school. But that said, tweaking it to the patient-doctor relationship, that kind of interpersonal relationship certainly is important, but it shouldn't be a new topic, when they get there. Okay, so anyone else?
I see, this is Betty, I see there are things posted where elementary students are being given skills and directives, really. If you see a child sitting alone, go over and sit with them, whether it's on the bench out in front or at lunch. We could all take some lessons from that, I think. One of the things I think we should not do is say to somebody you've just met, now, where are you from? Where are you really from?
Mhm.
That's, it's so offensive.
Mm. Talk about that a little bit about that, Betty. When you ask someone, where are you from? Talk a little bit about the offensiveness of that.
Well, I think of it mostly happening where the person being asked does not look like everyone else in the room or in the community. And it's, I think people are just so damned curious, they can't stand it until they nail that person down and put a label on them. We don't need that. We just need to be friends and be there to smile and sit with them and give them an opportunity to relax with us. That's how I see that. And I understand it because I grew up here too. And there weren't any other people obvious when I grew up in Aberdeen. It was very rare. And then I moved away to a diverse part of the country, and I had my own come to Jesus moments, so to speak, when I realized that the first thing I saw about people was the color of their skin. And so I had to devise a couple of ways to deal with that. One of which was when I spoke about somebody that I had made friends with or met, to maybe somebody in my family or another friend, that I didn't always lead that with, oh, I met this Black guy today, or I met this Mexican woman today. I just had to quit saying that, because let them find out for themselves and make their own judgment, and then that forced me to be super aware of what was going on in my brain. And I was raising 2 small children at the time, and I certainly wanted them to have a more open mind, and that's my take on it, I guess.
Yeah, I really wanted you to flesh that out, and I think you did a good job of that. I will say that once I did sit next to this girl and just smiled at her, didn't work out that well, just kept smiling, didn't say anything. But
No, I smiled back.
but at any rate, I think that you make some really good points, and one of them is that when you ask certain questions, you have no way of knowing that other person's, let's say, history and how they take things. And that's, of course, what makes interpersonal relationships complicated, and also for many people treacherous, because one thing we fear is rejection. We really don't like being rejected, even by people that we should be rejected. We would hope that they would reject us, because that would save us the problem of rejecting them. But that said, we don't like rejection, and so we don't want to risk it, especially in just getting to know somebody. And so people have a hard time coming up with those, let's say, opening lines. In junior high school, we used to practice opening lines. Like, well, if you meet a girl, what's the first thing you should say? Like to get her attention or something like that. And we would just sort of like study it like a PhD thesis. Like, no, I tried that didn't work. But this kind of girl work, but that kind of girl don't work. So and I took that forward to think, oh, okay, well, when you meet people in a room that you don't know, what's a good way to start? What's a good conversation starter? And it usually, for some people, it's like that's the only thing they know to ask is, where are you from? Because one thing we know right away is you're not from here, because if you were from here, I would know you. So now the next question is, since you're not from here, are you 10 miles away, 100 miles away, another planet, another country, another culture? And some people know other people through the boxes that they put them in. In other words, they need to know, they need to have a box in order to understand you. Some people can't see a picture without seeing it, without a frame. You know, if you don't put a frame on it, for some reason, their brain can't register the picture. They don't know what to do with it, which is why people have a hard time with abstracts, because the mind can't like orient toward, okay, is it a tree or is that a giraffe or what? And it doesn't like to struggle with that. It likes, like you were saying, Betty, it likes to come to real quick conclusion. But that said, any other things that general observations that you have made about interpersonal relations, interpersonal skills, or the lack of?
One thing you had brought up, I think that can't be overemphasized, is the whole thing about you should teach it in kindergarten. When I came to work here in a very multicultural setting, there's probably, I think they have 77 different countries that work here. My boss at the time was my boss in Rapid City before he was my boss here. And the main piece of advice, and he repeated it many times, was, you know, one thing when you're working here, really what you need to think is that book, Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And he absolutely meant it, because there, by getting to kind of that basics, like a really, like, you get it down to just that human level. When you think on that level, you open yourself up to communication. It may be basic, but it will not be misunderstood usually. It will not be, you know, it won't be inappropriate. And most of the time when people have had problems here, it's when they carry something over from where they've been. And my predecessor here, I also worked with in Rapid City. So we had the same boss in both places. He had a lot of problems with that. And I think back to my experience, my first experience out of college was I worked a year in Gettysburg, South Dakota, as the editor of the paper there. And that's a pretty close culture. You know, it's 1,500 people, and there aren't a lot of newcomers there. And what I found is that the person who had hired me kind of had laid down a lot of groundwork. So when I came there, people didn't ask me things like, where are you from? They were more like, oh, you must be the guy from the newspaper. So they already had put me someplace, but it was not in a, like, you know, in a place where I'd feel uncomfortable. So what he had done was, okay, oh, they're going to know this guy. He works at the newspaper. And, you know, and so it kind of allowed me to start on a place. And a lot of times those people, there were certain people in that community that were not welcome wagon, but they acted in that way. Individuals. So in a small town, because people knew their roles, a lot of them, there was a few people, that was their deal, as they showed you around. They said, oh yeah, you know, we play basketball on Tuesday and Friday nights, you can, you know, here, and we do this, and, you know, and just having that entry was huge. But I knew people, teachers who came in cold to the same community and never really adjusted, because they didn't have that, anybody laying that groundwork. So a lot of times it's as much, you know, you have to be open to it, but also the community you walk into, like you said, there's people you can smile at forever. They're not going to respond. And so there is this thing where you can be very open, but you also have to kind of figure out, is this working, you know? And what do you do when it doesn't? I think that's the question everybody asks, is like, I'm going to do this, but what if it doesn't do what I think it will do? Yeah, the hidden cultural nuance.
You hit on a couple of really many actually good points, and one of which I think should have a little spotlight thrown on it is the importance of an ambassador. You know, the person who told people up front, or they created the framework in which the people could see you, so their brain doesn't have to do all these calisthenics to try to figure you out and stuff like that. They already had a sense, or at least they had a prequel to Todd, you know? And so even if they were wrong, they had something, and the brain doesn't like to not know. It doesn't like a vacuum. So if they, even if the thing is wrong, they'd rather have the wrong thing, often that's the case, than nothing, you know? And absent that, they will make up stuff. But they like to, one of the reasons they ask you is like, a big question is where you're from. Because now if they've ever heard of that place, one, they could think, do I know anybody there? You know, and then that person, and just the fact that they can connect you with someone they know, whether that person knows you or not, they have a sense of that's some kind of connection. So people are often looking for, well, what's my connection, good or bad? You know, how am I supposed to feel about this person? It reminds me of that experiment people did with they show these cowboy movies, and they put the white hat on the bad guy and the black hat on the good guy. And it really messed up people's minds because they were so used to the movies telling them who the bad guy was and who the good guy was, you know, by these signals. Kind of like if you go to a kabuki play, you know what all the plays or opera, the way the person does something, that means that's what they are, right? So they don't have to say a lot of stuff to paint a picture because you know relationships, right? So they're looking, sometimes people are looking for that so that they can do something. Anything else? Other people's impressions about the importance of interpersonal skills. Okay. Well, if anybody else has anything, just jump right in. You know, I can see when your microphone is turned off. Lee, you were.
Yeah, I always jump in, don't I?
Yeah, great.
I've been thinking of this discussion.
Mm.
We're trying to institutionalize behavior.
Mm.
And much of how we behave is when we get our training at home, not only training such, but that are modeled. What are our models at home? How do parents or parent, whatever it might be, react to other people? Children watch. They learn more from observation and role modeling than teaching and learning that way.
Mm.
And that is really missing in our world because of many reasons, time and so forth, situations. But that is one thing. It's kind of interesting seeing what the conversation has turned out to be. For that reason, I wanted to say that.
Mm.
Because I was teaching this in class.
Mm.
And that was, you know, teenagers.
Mm.
Where do we go from here? I don't know.
Well, I think it's a good start just to raise it up, to say, okay, this is a thing, you know, and especially in light of the fact that as social animals, if we don't get this right, you know, the rest seems kind of academic. But that said, how would you rate interpersonal skills versus other skills? Are there other skills that people need that you can think of that are in some way equal to or greater than the need for interpersonal skills? And you'll think there would be something out there, but I'll leave it to you. Well, I don't hear any. Betty, did you have one? You turned it off now.
Had it
Oh,
off
there you
on there. Some highly intellectual people that I know and have known seem to have more trouble with interpersonal skills. And that can be difficult for those who would like to know them better. And the other thought, talking about what Lee was saying about teaching teenagers, it seems to me that teenagers spend a lot of time with their peer group. And so their skills, perhaps they invent, or maybe they learn from each other. Kind of leaves me in the dark sometimes, but I do try to spend time with younger folks, and I'm lucky to have some in my family nearby. It's a puzzle.
Deb, did you have a contribution?
A little bit, maybe. I taught first grade for many years, and I'd much rather have a student that had interpersonal skills, was maybe a C or D student, than an A student that had none of those skills. Because you can learn the other stuff. You can learn the math and the science and history and all that. But you're always gonna have neighbors, you're always gonna have a boss. You're probably have a boss. You need those skills no matter what. You have to learn to deal with authority, with police, whatever. It's like those are so important. The other stuff, you can seek that out and find it if you need to. But the interpersonal skills you don't have, doesn't matter how smart you are, you're not going to be able to get along in this world. I've got a new little dog that lives in the country, and that she barks at every little thing, a little turtle. She's like, I have to protect this house. That's driving me nuts.
Okay. Well, could you turn off your mic so he can hear? All right, good, thanks. But thanks. Where'd you go? Oh, there she is. Yeah. Yeah, we wanted to hear what the dog had to say too, but we need time to translate, you know. Okay, so you made some very good points there, Deb, and it really is important, you know, in the sense of, you know, when you said that you would rather have a student that had good interpersonal skills. That's the same thing I hear from employers. You know, is if a person has good interpersonal skills, we can pretty much teach him everything we need to know, even if he doesn't have any kind of education, because that person knows how to listen to other people. He knows how to ask questions. And if you have managers who have good interpersonal skills, they'll have the patience. And most people, if they could find a way here, you know, maybe they won't have the skills right away, but we can invest in that person because eventually they will be way much better off than the person who knows a lot of stuff and technically is excellent, but nobody likes that person. Nobody can communicate with that person because it's essentially their skills are isolated. You know, their skills are out there in a skill set. Nobody can access what they have to contribute because they don't have the interpersonal skills to connect up with other people. So that's one of the reasons why, you know, they say that it's really important for people to have those interpersonal skills. But now we get to, I think we've made some pretty good cases for why interpersonal skills are important. But I would like to explore now how we would learn those things. How even teach ourselves, how do we improve our interpersonal skills? How do what kind of things can we do in our society that will improve even the appreciation for interpersonal skills? Any suggestions?
Boy, do you poise tough questions. I have two thoughts. One is you don't make anyone do anything they do not want to do or be. He or she has to decide within each person whether they want to. You think you're trying to convince them, and maybe you do, but more than likely not. There are some people that are extremely private. They wouldn't ask you a question or be interested at all. They're very private people. And we as people have to respect their wishes. But I don't know. I don't know that we can show them that there's a value in it. When you talk about cost and value, you know, what is the cost if you don't have interpersonal relations? Does your business not do as well without it? You know, you might come at that angle, and would you get more business, more money, more friends, live happier? That is a discussion in itself. Wow, you've got so many discussions going, Lawrence. I'm getting dizzy. Thank you.
I started out dizzy. That's why the questions are making you dizzy. So you make an excellent point, and one that should be brought up, because a lot of people who are, let's say, they classify themselves as introverts, right? And I think a very good case could be made for, don't force those people to be something, you know, that's outside of their comfort zone. That said, there's a cost for the introversion. And that cost is a kind of disconnection. Even if people want to be connected to them, they don't know how. They don't know what you want. Where's the thing? You know, if you don't want me to ever talk to you, then that's okay, as long as you understand that there's a cost for that, especially if you don't want anybody to talk to you. And some people are introverts because they can't get over the anxiety of meeting people. You know, so is it that they don't want to be included? You know, if you're an introvert, should nobody ever invite you to anything? You know, should all the people avert their eyes when they come to you and go on and pretend like you're not there? I don't know that I've met many people who want that, you know, and when they get it, I'm not sure that they're very happy with that. But then what's the alternative? You know, and that's the kind of thing. But those are the kind of questions that we search for, and we search for a solution. To me, as a way to improve my interpersonal skills, is I'm looking for, well, thinking about that answer, and when I can talk to an introvert, to like try to get a handle on what they feel underneath what their exterior, you know. So what are some other ways that we can learn interpersonal skills? How should people teach themselves or teach that to others?
I think for myself, I have learned by watching. When I have been, you know, this harks back to probably junior high school, when I was afraid to get up and walk across the room because somebody might see me. And going forward, it helps if you kind of think about how someone else is behaving in a way that seems better, more comfortable, admirable, gets a good response from the other people in the room, and try to model that, and just, you know, be introspective along with being introverted, and then try to practice that.
I like what you say there, Betty, about practice, because I think that's a big part of it, you know, and of course, introspection then becomes part of that, because realistically, we learn more from times when things go bad, or we should anyway, than when they go good. Because you might not know what made it go good. Maybe that person was just super friendly, or maybe they were interested in you, or maybe you caught them on a good day. But when things go bad, a lot of times you can think back and say, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this. A friend, the guy I told you about earlier, the guy who was a little gruffer, who I replaced when I came here, famous story here, in which one summer they had summer students there, and one of the things that some locals here don't, there's some that don't ever like shake hands. Shaking hands with a member of the opposite sex would be unheard of. And this happened where they brought around 2 summer students, and one of them, he reached out his hand to shake her hand, and she's a young girl, probably 19, and she just burst into tears. And, she was just so shaken by that. And of course he couldn't understand that. And it only became famous because he did it again like 2 years later. And they're like, no, you have to understand, you can't do this. But realistically, by putting yourself out there, you learn a lot about how to, how you come across to people and things that you need to do perhaps to communicate better. I love the idea of practice, because it takes courage. Like you said, it's hard to do, particularly when you're younger. And I'm not saying it gets easier as you get older, but you realize the whole thing about cost is like, well, I don't have to, but then I won't get to learn things. I won't get to experience things. So a lot of it is just getting the courage and then taking note when you do. How do I come across? Maybe I'm a little too loud. Maybe I'm a little too quiet. Maybe, there's things, or maybe I need to, listen better, which I think is probably true for, certainly true for me, but it's true for a lot of people. We aren't as good of listeners always as we should be, at least in the way that we are hearing what people are saying and who they are, more than we're trying to figure out who they are and trying to get a response. So, those kind of things are always good, but you have to put yourself out there. You got to practice. You got to be willing to engage, even with people who may not be as willing to engage with you. I think it's been important for me anyway, in my experiences.
A good thing to focus on is the word interpersonal skills. Inter. That means it's not all on one side of the equation. There are things that the other side of the equation needs to get to. For example, I may have a real sensitivity to something, and you don't know my sensitivity to that. I may have a trigger word, and then you say that trigger word. How reasonable is it for me to expect to know all of my triggers? Really? It's nice if you do, but how reasonable is it for me to expect you to know and then be insulted or hurt if somehow you didn't magically know what my trigger was? I'm not sure how I should think about that, with myself. And then if I expect you to know all my trigger words, do I, on the other hand, expect that, am I expecting me to know all of yours? Multiply that by 7.5 billion people that have the potential to meet, and you can start to see that it could be a little complicated for me to sort of figure out everybody's triggers before I've met them. That could be problematic. So that's the kind of thing is like, okay, the interpersonal skills, like, well, how do you negotiate that? Recognizing that there's a pretty good chance that you'll make a mistake, every time you meet somebody. And some people you've known for years. Lee, you look like you're dialing us in.
Boy, you really read it all. I was thinking about what you just said, and it's more than your words. People read your face. And by the way, I could go into another speech of why people don't want people to see their face. That's a great deal how you communicate. I love seeing people's face, because when you first meet people you don't know in a group, they look at your eyes and your smile. And that is a welcoming message before you open your mouth. So what I'm saying is that, and your tone of voice, if you are talking about something and your voice gets to be kind of a demanding, or people fear what you're saying. I can't think of a word for it now, but anyway, that really communicates a negative. Now, a trigger, I understand you're talking about a gun as the example, that it would be negative. So I wouldn't call smiling a trigger, but it definitely gets your attention and starts the conversation.
Well, when I think of trigger, it's not necessarily, often is, but not necessarily negative. It's just something that causes another reaction, something that starts something, a catalyst, if you will, but is a reliable catalyst, right? We could say a switch, but the buzzword now is trigger, so I use that, but you're right, that it is a complex thing, and people do read something more than really much more seriously than what we say. They are looking at our face, our body language, and stuff like that. And for me, it's often like even a handshake. When I shake hands with someone, I can have a sense of whether they are just sort of like going through the motion because it's a public place, or they really don't want to touch me. There's something about in their handshake tells me a lot about how genuine they are, and especially if I watch them shake hands with other people. And the same with a smile. Like if you go to a cash register, if you go up to a cash register and you've been standing in the line watching this person interact with each person, and when they interact with you, even if you don't know them, you know how they feel relative to the other people that they have just been serving, right? And you make, even if you're not going to do anything with the information, it registers. Even if you decide, well, let me not focus on that for whatever reason, it still registers. And in the same way, it registers when you're in a group, at a party, or at a church, or any number of things. After a while, if you're paying attention, you gather quite a bit of information by those interactions. Other ways that people can learn interpersonal skills: practice, habits, anything else.
Roughly 50 years ago, I guess, I took a Toastmasters class at a community college in Yakima. And I can't say as I remember much of it, but going through the exercises and doing the practice of standing up and talking to people and critiquing each other, I'm sure that helped me. I'm far from a good public speaker, but that's a good way to start with a class of some sort, maybe, or a trainer.
But just to mention something, to go back, I think maybe it was Lee who was talking about teaching it in school, and I think a couple of people have mentioned, like early on gaining those skills. Years ago, I was asked by a Shinto priest to teach his grandchildren English. And he said, to be quite frank with you, I don't really care if they learn that much English. The point is, I want them to be comfortable with you as a way, as a way to learn to be comfortable with people who are not Japanese. I want them to be able to when they grow up, to be able to shake hands with people who are not Japanese and not have their palms be sweaty. And that always stuck with me. The lack of sweaty palms. You know, when you're nervous and you have anxiety, people can pick it up in sweaty palms. And if there's no reason, you've never had any reaction, you can have a sense of that nervousness of the palm, that and we learn as paramedics to take people's pulse while you're shaking their hand. You know, that's one of the tricks you learn as a paramedic. And you can feel not only the pace of the palm, but the quality of, the pace of the pulse, but the quality of the pulse. And you can tell how it changes, you know. So maybe it's like too much information, you know, but it's proved useful for me. And I think other people pick it up. They may not just be able to quantify it and, you know, thought about, okay, what does that mean relative to something else, you know, like we're taught to do, okay? But I think it still plays into interpersonal relationships. And I think it does start early, you know, because there are so many subtle things that you have to learn. Who should be responsible really for teaching the interpersonal skills?
I think everyone you meet kind of
Everyone you meet.
teaches you something if you're receptive. If you're not, then it doesn't really matter. But we can learn something good or bad or otherwise from every meeting we have. We can meet someone and even think, okay, now I know not what to do. That was an uncomfortable situation for me. I don't want to put someone else in that position. So we can learn what to do and what not to do, just from every little reading, and even from a stranger in a grocery store or something. Little things like that, you can think that was weird, that made me feel weird. And another one, you can think that was really nice, that was really comforting.
So each one teach one.
I think so.
Excellent. Crystal, you look like you were
Oh, yep.
ready
Good
to say
morning.
something. Good morning.
Yeah. So I was just thinking about all this conversation, like, and it's pretty interesting. And the fact that, I shut my door. The fact that interpersonal skills, I mean, all these things that everyone mentioned are good. And they all tie into, you know, to me, like a lot has to do with teaching it at home. And I mean, kids learn what they live, right? So they learn from us. When I think about it, I think about having self-confidence, and I think about having traditions, our culture, where we come from. I think about honesty in interpersonal communication. Like one day my sister and I were going into the grocery store, and this guy came out, and I just walked passing by. I said, hello, hi. And my sister said, shh, don't be saying hi to guys because they might think you like them. And I was like, oh, okay, all right. You know, so my sister is a few years older. She's not that many years, but, you know, maybe like 6, 7 years older. But I thought that was interesting. So then now I'm like, well, maybe I shouldn't say hi to someone because they might think they like me. But then I thought again, well, you know, this is my life. This is my, if I want to say hi to somebody, I can say hi to somebody, because some people have hangups that they're born or raised with because maybe something happened to them when they were younger. So it carries on into your life on how, you know, how we communicate with people. Those are the things that are learned behaviors, you know, like shaking hands, for instance. Now, you said, you know, if somebody doesn't have, you know, you're watching people and they're responding well and shaking good hands. When it comes to shaking your hand, you kind of felt like, hey, they didn't shake mine, he didn't smile as big when he shook my hand. you know, so then you kind of get these assumptions. And I
Hmm.
think sometimes we make assumptions more than just maybe evaluations or just our own thoughts, because every time we do that, we bring like, we might bring a negativity into our spirit that's like, oh, well, I don't like the way he looked at me at the grocery store, the cashier. He was looking at everyone else nice. Why didn't he look at me nice? You know, so that to me is a waste of my energy to think that way. So it's like, well, that's his stuff. I don't know. And I teach this to people too. I'm like, you don't know, like at work, at our big tribal office, people will get mad at each other. Their whole day can be ruined because they'll pass someone in the hallway and they'll say, oh my God, I said hi and they didn't even say hi back to me. Oh my God. And then pretty soon they go home. I said hi to Sally and she didn't even say hi to me. And then the mom's like, oh, well, you know, her mom doesn't like me. She never did. So now I'm sure her daughter doesn't like you either. You know, so then it gets that negative conversation going. And pretty soon it's like two people are hating each other just because maybe somebody was having a bad day. Maybe somebody was sad or whatever, you know, maybe somebody did not hear you, you know, so we have to remember that. Don't make assumptions. And just if somebody doesn't respond to your hello, or if somebody gives you a weak handshake, that's their stuff. That's not your stuff. You just go on and be your own beautiful, you know, self, and just, you know, don't carry that with, I try to teach people, don't carry that with you, because that does not belong to you. That belongs to them. However they treat, if, you know, if you might feel like you've been ousted in a group or whatever, well, that's that, you know, you just go on and be who you are and stand up for what you believe in. So, you know, like my son is 14 now, and he's this whole last year, he's actually been quarantined. He has not been outside very much. He's been in his room, in the house. He hasn't, and we've been so scared of this virus. Well, yesterday was the first day of school. I got him up at 7 and I didn't think he was going to get up. Man, he jumped right up and he got in the shower and he got ready, and I took him into the school. And this is a child that when I would take him into school, his interpersonal relationships with, he'll just put his head down and he doesn't want to look at anybody. He doesn't want to talk. So the teachers had to learn that when he gets that way, and when he was younger in 2nd, 3rd grade, they would push him. They would try to, hey, you better talk back. You better look at me. You better do this, stand up. But I said, give him his time and let him come around. Give him his space. And so when we give people space, they can have time to feel welcome there. Man, yesterday he jumped right in there. He's at school. He had a good day. And, you know, he's a bigger boy. And so he's been bullied, but he made it through the school day. And I picked him up and he had a big smile on his face. Even though he doesn't really, I said, did you talk to anybody today? And he don't really talk to people. But that's, you know, for him, he had a smile. He likes to listen. He'll listen to people. We talked about doing a podcast because this child is intelligent. When him and I have one-on-one. So I'm like, maybe I'm gonna get you on a podcast, because that might help him to get interpersonal, you know, out to more people, because he has that within him. I see it. I know it's there, but it's just, we've got to, I don't know what it is, but like if you, Lawrence went to shake his hand, he would pull his sleeve down and then shake your hand. He doesn't like touching skin on skin. That people think that's weird. One day I was at the store and I reached out my hand and I shook this guy's hand, and he said, I don't really like to shake hands. And I was like, I'm sorry. He's like, no, he said, and Tino said, I don't like to shake hands either. And so he was like, yeah, Tino, it's okay. You and I, we don't have to shake hands. If, you know, we don't like to, we don't have to. So I'm like, I understand. You can go perfectly it's good. We're good with it. You know, if you need to go hurry and wash your hands, go do it. Because some people have germ phobias. But so what I'm saying is that, you know, the confidence and the giving people their space, and then remembering that we want our space, and to not make so much assumptions because maybe somebody doesn't smile at us, or somebody, you know, we don't all have to have this cheery, cheery face and all this kind of stuff, because even like my face, I'm just kind of like, people think I look mean a lot, but if you get to know me, I'm not mean, at all, but I can be if I am put in a situation. I mean, we all have those times. So, but, I just want to share my 2 cents. I think it's a good topic. It's got me thinking again every week. You guys got me thinking with all these topics. Good to keep our brains moving. So thank you.
Good. You put out some very interesting points and ones which basically point to interpersonal skills. All of those things of making judgments, not making judgments, checking our judgments, because something should be said about assumptions. It's really just stopping at the assumption that's the bad thing, because we always have to start with an assumption, like we exist. There's always that baseline assumption, but not testing our assumptions is often where and not recognizing that they're just assumptions, that they're not based on anything, is usually where we get into trouble.
Yeah.
But you make some really important points, is that we can't really stop there and think that, well, that's the way it is in my head, so that's the way it is in other people's head. That what I said is what they heard, or what they said is what I heard, or what I heard them say is what they meant. All of those things, they are complicated, and I think that's why we keep growing that prefrontal cortex, is because it gets more complicated as we go along. as we go along, and it's harder, and it's harder to make accurate assumptions, and even harder to evaluate them. But that's what we do, and that is the practice, and that is the point of improving our interpersonal skills.
Yeah.
It's really important to recognize that we are social beings.
Mhm.
And if we don't have each other, we don't have much. Most of us, I would say darn near all of us, would have trouble surviving more than a week if we were out on our own. If everybody else disappeared, we would, even people we don't like, they are contributing to our well-being, often whether they know it or not. And so as a result, one of the most important things I can think of that we need to know is how to get along with each other, how to make that space for each other, but not make the space so big that the other person can't connect with us, how to be willing to wait for that person to be ready to connect with us.
Yeah.
To understand that they also can make misjudgments, just like we can, about who the other person is and what they want. And we need to give them space to reconnect. All of that is interpersonal relationships, understanding others largely through understanding ourselves, because we often see each other based on who we are. So with that said, and with the time, we are going to call it an hour today, and hope that you'll join us next week and bring your friends. It's open. I understand there's some people, I meet them anyway, that they say that they saw it on Facebook and they'll engage me with conversations that they heard on Facebook. And by the way, Lee, Jennifer Dreisky said to say hello to you. So I had to remember that, because I told her that I saw you, because she said she had watched something and she saw you on there. So, okay, until next week, we'll see you guys, brand new show.
How do we get